All right, welcome everybody. Sorry for being a little bit late. I'm Dr. Berlox, Dr. B. I'm going to double check here and make sure that everything is working okay. As you can see, I am in a different location. Okay, good. It looks like we're looking okay here. So I'm not in my home office anymore, and you can see why. I had so much that I needed to put up on the board, and it didn't make any sense to try to be erasing every 6 measures and doing it on a smaller whiteboard. I obviously needed an upgrade. So I'm glad you're here with me again. So again, welcome to Dr. B Music Theory. This one's a big one, so buckle up. What I want to talk about was, this is from a question from one of my Patreon subscribers who asked me about analyzing a Bach chorale. And so that's what we're going to spend a bunch of time doing right from the beginning. And after that, which might take 30, 40 minutes easily, I'm going to open it up and answer questions that you can put in the chat. Until that point, I'm not really going to be looking at the chat too much. So if you have things that you're putting there and I don't respond right away, you know why. So anyways, let me first do a little bit of housekeeping and explaining what it is what you're looking at here. Okay, so this is a chorale by Bach. It was, and for those of you who want to listen to it, which is always a good idea, I'm going to write the name up here, and do leave in the comments. Let me know if this is like because this is a wider view, a little farther away, whether you can still see the music well enough. I know if you're using a mobile phone, that might be a little bit tricky. Hopefully it still works. And if you're using a laptop or a desktop, I assume that should be fine with the size. But do let me know about that in the chat. Okay, so this was a chorale hymn that Bach did not compose. This was composed in 1560. Erscheinen ist der herrliche Tag. It was a German Easter hymn, and he said it 3 different times in 2 different cantatas. So he did it in BWV 67, which was a cantata, BWV 145, which is what this one is, the one we're looking at is, and then finally BWV 629, which is for organ. So when this was sent to me, the question was to really focus in on those final measures, and I started looking at it. It was a challenge. It was definitely a challenge, and so I kind of said, well, let me just make sure I'm looking at the right things. What was sent to me was actually an arrangement from someone who had arranged it for piano about maybe 15 years ago. So the first thing as a scholar and a researcher that you want to do is you want to say, well, is this arrangement accurate? And one of the things I found out was that there was so I went and I tried to find more original source material. That's what I did. So I go onto IMSLP, and as well as doing some Google searches. This website has so much free sheet music PDFs that you can download. So I went there, I did some Google searches. That's how I found out about all this kind of backstory and how many times it's been used. One of the challenges is that every single source I found had this chorale with a different key signature. So as you're trying to analyze this, I realized that key signature alone wouldn't do it. There were 3 different versions, and I actually don't think this is the version I use. But I actually don't think this is the correct key signature. And we'll kind of hopefully get into why I don't think that's the correct key signature. But that's a huge challenge, and I've mentioned this before in some of my earlier videos and my lessons, is that sometimes you'll get an excerpt in a theory exam or a theory homework assignment, and it won't be in the key that it actually is functioning as. And that's because it might be an excerpt from a larger work. It could be because of editorial decisions, like in the example I'm talking about, where I looked at it and it was in the one I looked at that I was sent, the arrangement had 4 sharps. There were some that had 3 sharps, and this one that I copied down had 2 sharps. I mean, how to make your life a little bit more challenging, right? To really test your theory if you're understanding what you're looking at. And so obviously these 3 different key signature versions would have different accidentals added in. So one of the things I was looking at, and the reason I went with this source, is that it also had a actual continuo part with figured-based numbers written in with accidentals. That said, I still don't think this is the key signature it's actually in. I think it was probably put in that key signature either as an editorial mistake or because it's fitting into a larger part of the cantata and for some reason makes sense with that. And that it made more sense to do that as opposed to write a new key signature. I'm not quite sure why. I mean, if it were me, I would just write a new key signature, you know, make all the theory people in the world, make their lives a little easier. But that's not what happened in this case. So we have to get to the bottom of it. So with that in mind, knowing that there's these different key signatures, you can't simply, you know, to simply say, I'm going to look at the key signature and it's either going to be, D major or B minor. Nope. It's not that simple, right? It's actually far more complicated. And we know because this piece has been found in 3 different key signatures already. So which one is the right one? So we're going to have to do some digging. And let me tell you how we're going to do that. I'm going to double check my notes here. Okay, so the first thing I'm doing is I'm kind of to figure out what key is this really in, is I look at where it starts and where it ends. That's always a great thing, right? And so I'm not doing an analysis here, and this is an important distinction. An analysis is to use Roman numerals to analyze how it's functioning. Is it functioning as a tonic chord, a dominant chord? That's what you do when you're doing a real analysis. Step 1 is really more appropriately called labeling. You're labeling what are the chords. And you're not trying, like almost like a jazz or pop music lead sheet symbols. You're just labeling what is it. You're not analyzing it yet. So we start off here, F sharp A, C sharp, F sharp. That is an F sharp minor triad. Okay, good to know. How do we end? F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, F sharp. That's an F sharp major triad. And I'm actually going to write this a little bit. Let me see. Get a good eraser here. I'm going to go ahead and actually write the lead sheet symbols in maybe in red. Okay, so F sharp major, and for the ending, and F sharp minor for the beginning. So that's encouraging, right? It's like, okay, it's ending with that same tonic. The fact that it ends in major isn't a complete shocker because we know the kind of the Picardy third, having something in a minor key that then ends with a major triad to give it more resolution. So maybe that's what we're talking about here. So that's promising. So continuing with the idea of labeling, let's keep working from the beginning. We go to this G sharp B here with eighth notes. These look like passing tones. So I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be labeling eighth notes. Most of this stuff is quarter note movement. That's typical for Bach in terms of harmonic rhythm. So I go to beat 2. I see A, C sharp, F sharp. So that's an F sharp minor triad. Same thing we just had a second ago, but in first with A in the bass. And then we have a B major triad. Well, actually that B major triad is the first place where I'm like, ooh, B major triad. If I'm in the key of F sharp minor, I expect B minor, not B major. And when I was doing a little research looking for this online, some people called this Dorian as a designation for this chorale. And let me talk a little bit about what that means. So Dorian is a mode, and you can look at some of my earlier lessons about modes. But the Dorian mode is a minor mode that goes, let me see if I can give myself enough room to do this. I would like to put the Dorian mode right here, which would be 1 major second, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, minor seven. So this is the Dorian mode. And so this major six, which is what the D sharp would be in the key of F sharp minor, would be a Dorian sound. Now, this presents another level of complication. When we're talking about the Baroque era, we're talking about a time period that's just coming out of the Renaissance, where the emphasis musically was absolutely on the melodic line and the horizontal. The emphasis was on creating awesome melodies that come together in a pleasing way. But the way they come together was not the primary focal point. So it's not quite like you could say, oh, look at this chord, look at this chord, look at this chord. They're more like, oh, it happens to create a chord, but that chord doesn't really have a lot of meaning, which is why sometimes in the Renaissance or even sometimes in the Baroque era, you'll get things like, a minor 3-6-4 chord or a 6-6 chord or some strange like 2 diminished 6-4. You'll get some very unusual Roman numerals. And that's in part because Roman numeral analysis was really what was a great explanation for the classical era. So the Baroque is like a transition from this horizontal approach to writing music to what's going to become more and more a vertical approach to writing music, where what chords happen to be created by the individual melodies becomes the emphasis. And the Baroque era is kind of the transition between the horizontal emphasis of the Renaissance and the vertical emphasis of the classical era. And as such, sometimes you will get Roman numerals that don't make a lot of sense. So if you're looking at the chart of good chord progressions and all of that stuff, you might sometimes get things that you're like, well, Dr. B, that's not the way a progression is supposed to work. And the reason for that might be that at that time or at that moment in the piece, Bach is using a more Renaissance horizontal approach, and it's really the emphasis is he's creating a great melody because it's a chorale, it's for a bunch of singers, and he's dipping into that background. That makes particular sense with something like this, which is a German Easter hymn. Easter, religious, he's going to get more traditional. He's going to go back to those more traditional compositional practices, and the Renaissance was a grand flourishing throughout the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance of sacred music, especially for the Catholic Church, but not only the Catholic Church, but Protestant churches like the Lutheran Church and the Church of England. So the Renaissance has this amazing tradition of religious music where you have this horizontal emphasis on melody, and sometimes the chords don't really, they sound pretty, like 3-6-4. And sounds like a perfectly good sound, right? It's not dissonant. And it goes to the question that a lot of music theory students and young composers, or let's say not say young in terms of age, but beginning composers, up-and-coming composers have, is like, you might say, well, Dr. B, I don't understand why we're not allowed to use a 3-6-4 chord. It sounds pretty. And my answer is, yes, it does sound pretty, but for classical music specifically, and sometimes for a lot of Baroque music, that's not traditionally how it was used. It has a little bit more instability. It has a slightly different character. It's not vertically dissonant in sense of the way the pitches combine, but the way that it functions into the larger scheme is just can sound a bit quirky or unusual. So this really opens a whole can of worms of very complex music theory thought that has to be addressed if you're going to really get as deep as the music goes. So this horizontal versus vertical aspect comes into play, and it really, it comes in on beat 3 of the piece where we're like, because here's the question, you're like, are we modulating by the 3rd beat of an entire piece? That's weird. Is that B major an example of mode mixture, using what would be from the parallel major? Maybe, because we're going to F sharp major at the end. So we have to keep those things in mind as we continue forward, which is why we're starting with labeling first, as opposed to going directly into a Roman numeral analysis. Now, this next beat in the next measure illustrates part of my point about why this is conceived of in many respects as a horizontal piece. Notice that we have voice crossing. The alto part, so I'm sorry, not the alto, the tenor part. So we have the bass and tenor both sharing the note B right here. And it's approached by contrary motion, so that's no problem. And you can share a note for one beat. That's no problem. But then the bass sustains the B, ties it over the measure, while the tenor jumps down to G sharp and then up to C sharp. So the rule is that the bass is supposed to be the lowest note you hear, and the tenor is the second lowest. But that changes right here. And why is that? It's to make the tenor part have a good melody, right? So here's the melody of the tenor part as written. Here's what it would be if there was no voice crossing. It's not as interesting. It has a lot of kind of like, and it keeps staying on the, you have an emphasis on these C sharp, B, B, C sharp, B, B. It's a lot of repetition. And so the idea is to give the tenor part a nicer melody. In the bass part, as written, right? So it has a little repetition in the middle, but then it moves very quickly out of that. And if the bass part were to, actually not have the overlapping, it would sound like this. I'm sorry. I played the wrong rhythm these last couple times. I think, here we go. Let me do that again. Right, so kind of, it gives, it would be fine for the bass, but the tenors would it's more balanced now by the way he does it with the voice crossing. So, also keep in mind this was originally cantata, so there'd be an orchestral part. So even though the voice crosses, you might have a double bass or an instrument playing that B. So we're going to use that bass as our, for our leaches symbol. And we're going to say we've got C sharp, E, G sharp, B. So C sharp minor triad, minor 7 chord with B in the bass. Going to an F sharp major triad with A sharp in the bass to a B major triad. Let's just keep going until we get to a cadence and see what happens. Here we have G sharp B, G sharp E. That's an E major triad with G sharp in the bass. We're going to call that A sharp a passing tone, going to an E major 7 chord. And notice that we have a spacing issue here. This is G sharp to B. This is more than an octave. So if we want to say, well, Bach is breaking rules a whole bunch here, and it might have to do, again, with the idea of creating melodies. And E major 7, that's wacky for Bach. So maybe the D sharp is a passing tone, is really just an E major triad. We know it's an E something, right? But is it a triad or is it a major 7? Major 7 seems very unusual. I'm going to call it an E major triad, and I'm going to assume this D sharp is a passing tone. Then we go to an F sharp major triad, the A sharp carrying through here, and then a B major triad. So, not that we're going to get into the Roman numeral analysis immediately here, but just looking at it, when I said, well, is that B major triad an example of mode mixture? Well, we don't go directly back into F sharp minor, so the answer would be no. That's not an example of mode mixture. And we cadence in B major. So is that cadence in B major a modulation or a tonicization? These are the questions we're going to have to ask ourselves as we're going forward. But let's see if we can answer some of them so that, as we can continue just going labeling, but let's work back a little bit just to see where we came from. So this last measure here, C sharp, F sharp, A, that's an F sharp minor triad. Well, that's encouraging. That thinks that we're probably in the key of F sharp minor here. It then goes to a C sharp with a suspension here. The F sharp is a suspension, but it becomes a C sharp 7, the E sharp here, the B here. This A here is a lower neighbor tone, so C sharp 7, which makes a lot of sense because that would be 5-1. So F sharp minor, then a cadence to F sharp major. That makes a bunch of sense. Let's keep going. Let's just keep going forward now that we know that, yeah, we're almost definitely in the key of F sharp minor. When we're going to go back and start doing the Roman numeral analysis, we're going to have to ask ourselves, when are we modulating and when are we just doing secondary functions? So here we move forward. We got an F sharp major triad with A sharp in the bass. Here we've got a B major triad. Here we've got, and let me just see, I'm going to just double check. Can you talk more on the horizontal or modal sound from Renaissance and Baroque and how to use it in your own writing? Oh yeah, that's a great question, Coulter. The difference between 3- and 4-part species counterpoint versus part writing, that's a whole other question. Coulter, since yours is actually on topic here, and that's not an insult to the off-topic questions. We'll get to those. But since this one's on topic, the idea of horizontal writing and how do you use that is the idea of really just an emphasis on voice leading. So the emphasis is voice leading, creating great melodies, and consonants. Having a correct dissonance in consonants. So what will happen is you'll get certain things that, so for example, I'm going to play something here. And this is an example I've used before. And I apologize, that piano's a bit out of tune, but that's an example of something that goes from D flat major to A minor with C in the bass to B major. And you get the melody line going F, E, D sharp. As chords, this progression doesn't follow the circle of fifths. It doesn't have any of those expectations. But it doesn't matter because the voice leading and the chromatic descent is so compelling and makes so much sense to our ear that the fact that the harmonies don't make a ton of sense as related to each other just doesn't matter. So if you want to use that kind of concept in your own writing, this is where when people study species counterpoint, this is where a lot of that comes from. They're really concerned about having a good melody. And so you have the idea of when you take a leap, you step back in the opposite direction, that you don't necessarily outline your melodies outline. So like if you have a melody that starts here and goes down here, that this note compared to this note over the span of however many notes it took doesn't outline like a tritone or a dissonant interval. So you start getting into those kind of considerations on a very long span melody format. And so if you're going to use this in your writing, concentrate on creating a great melody with occasional leaps that then step back in the opposite direction, with a single focal point to that melody, a climax to that melody. And then don't concern yourself with whether it's going to go through the circle of fifths. Just say, you know, if every part moves in a smooth way, up or down by step, or maybe a third here or there, or every now and then a leap to make things exciting, don't worry about how the chords play out. And you'll get some unusual things. And it'll open up different kind of emotional possibilities for you. So when the harmonies go just as we expect them, that's going to open up certain emotional things that you can't get if you're just writing horizontal, and vice versa, right? So which technique you use, an emphasis on the horizontal or the vertical, is going to be very much dependent on what you want to express, what feelings. Very often the horizontal approach gives a feeling of just things kind of like transition and more metamorphosis and organic growth, whereas the the harmony, when the harmony moves as expected, it almost feels like, boy, this is hard. It's really hard to put this level of subtlety of emotion into words. It almost feels like you're jumping from stone to stone in a way that's like really like energetic. Like, of course I'm going to jump onto this stone, and then I'm going to jump onto this stone. There's almost an inevitability, a heroic quality to the vertical harmonies kind of doing that. And I acknowledge that what I'm saying right now is just scratching the surface of what the kind of emotions that can be explored are. But they are different, and each one of them has their advantages. So, great initial question, and I know I didn't thoroughly answer it, but I at least hopefully gave you something to think about in terms of starting on how to think about it. So this one right here is an E sharp diminished triad with G sharp in the bass. Here we get to F sharp minor again. So maybe this is back to a 1 chord, or maybe we're in another key. Neighbor tones, passing tones. F sharp minor triad with A in the bass. Then we have G sharp, C sharp, G sharp, E, and I'm just going to. So here we would say a C sharp minor triad with G sharp in the bass. Going to D sharp, half diminished 7 with F sharp in the bass, to a G sharp 7 because of the B sharp right here, cadencing on a C sharp major triad. So this is going to be complicated as we go for a Roman numeral analysis. Okay, but see, check my work, and for those of you who are looking at this on the rewind, you can pause, double check my work. I try to be perfect, but every now and then I do make a mistake. So please let me know if I do. I give my students extra credit if they can catch me making a mistake. It keeps me honest, keeps me on my toes. So keeping going, we come back and we go to a F sharp minor triad. We then get to a E major triad with G sharp in the bass. And then here, that becomes like an E7. So whether that's a passing tone or actual an E7, we'll have to wait and see, but we'll keep that in mind. Going to an A major triad. Here we've got overlapping again. If you notice here, the tenor jumps. This is not voice crossing, it's overlapping. The bass was an A, and the tenor is below what the bass used to be. So it creates a little bit of a, for the ear, that's something you don't want to do a lot of because it makes it hard for the ear to follow the individual melodies. So it's better if they have their own kind of sonic zone. And here the tenor is impinging upon the bass zone. But it does jump right back up. So just a little bit of notes, of paying attention to where Bach breaks the rules. And it's always worth trying to understand why. Why does it still work? Why is he just not laughed at being some hack that makes mistakes? So right here we're talking about a B major triad with D sharp there in the bass. We then, this A here, we could consider our passing tone maybe. We then go to an E major triad. If we jump down here to this next part, here we're talking A major, I believe. Yep, with C sharp in the bass. So A major with C sharp in the bass. And then going to F sharp minor with A in the bass. And then a B major triad, and then a cadence on an E major triad, followed by C sharp minor F sharp minor, D with F sharp in the bass, E7 with G sharp in the bass, A, C sharp with E sharp in the bass, F sharp minor, C sharp minor, E with G sharp in the bass, cadence on an A major triad. And then we're in the home stretch here. We just got the G sharp, diminished triad with B in the bass. All right, so I obviously did that ahead of time, and I didn't walk you through each one of those. So if spelling, analyzing what triads and sonorities they are is something that you're still working on, you're going to want to spend time writing out your triads. Just write them all out in all 15 keys. So write out all your major triads, write out all your minor triads, write out all your diminished triads. Obviously, we don't use a lot of augmented, so consider that one optional. But if you write them out all with accidentals, all courtesy accidentals, if you want to think about it that way, that might help you when you're trying to spell and do these chords quickly. And keep in mind, if you're composing and you don't have unlimited time, being able to know your triads quickly is going to help you. It's also going to help in the terms of if you have like an idea, but you then got to spend time to be like, how do you spell that chord? You might lose your train of thought. So speed counts for a composer in terms of making sure you can keep your train of thought, keep the creativity flowing. But then certainly if you're taking an exam, you don't get unlimited time to take an exam or a test. So practicing getting your triads to be able to figure out the notes and identify them quickly is well worth your time. All right, so where do we begin? And I will tell you right now that I do not think that I have the 100% accurate best Roman numeral analysis for you. I could feel that I was like, this is hard, this is complicated, I had a little bit of uncertainty, so I contacted one of my music theory friends and colleague and said, here's what I came up with. What do you think? And she thought there was a bunch of stuff I had wrong. So I'm going to kind of present to you everything, and then we're going to see whether we can get a little bit closer. But it goes to show you that even in music theory, especially because there's a horizontal and a vertical component, there's some dispute and there's some debate as to whether something is a modulation or a tonicization, how it actually functions, like how do we hear it? Like we all agree with what the triad is, like there's no debate on that. But whether it's functioning as a 2-chord or a 4-chord, like there sometimes you get some debate. So let's see if we can get a little bit more insight into how this piece actually functions. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to say that we start here we're in F sharp minor is our key, even though the key signature doesn't support that. And we start with a 1 chord, we go to a 1/6 chord. We got no problem with that. We're going to end with a major 1 chord in the key of F sharp. This is going to be a 5/7. This is going to be a 1/6/4, going backwards, right? And if we keep going backwards, the G sharp diminished, this is going to be a 2 diminished 6. Now A, as a cadence, this is where we're going to have to say, okay, are we in a different key? Or is that a 3 chord? And we're going to need a little bit more information before we can quite come to terms with that. But we're going to assume all this right here, F sharp minor to the end, even though we end on the F sharp major. We talked about that. So if we just look at cadences, and this is kind of what I did. I said, well, this is a cadence in B, and I can easily see 5/1. I can just go back from there, and then I'll look at this cadence, C sharp, and I'll go back from there, and I'll look at this cadence, E major, I'll go back from there, A major, go back from there. I mean, as the most simplistic way to do it, and that's how I started. Now, this is where my colleague disagreed with me. So let me show you what I did, and then let's examine what her thoughts were and see if if it makes sense that we should be changing what I came up with. So I worked backwards. I said, okay, this is a B major triad. That's 1 chord. 5 chord comes before that. This is a 4 chord, which supports this idea that that D sharp, we can just call it a passing tone, even though it creates this major 7 sonority. But this is another example where the horizontal is really explaining why it is. It's a cool sound, and you should absolutely listen to this. Listen to this piece and listen to whether that idea of modal aspects, which is something that the Renaissance had a lot of. I think there is some support to that. That D sharp is one of the things. Actually, the D sharp in general in this is supporting that idea. But going back farther, this would just be a 4/6, the E major. B would be a 1 chord right up here, and then keep going back, a 5/6. C sharp minor 7 over B is a 2/4/2. So we could simply say that this passage, and I'm going to see if I can highlight it, is in the key of B major. Right? And we have this kind of, we start, we then, this, if we go back, this would be a 1 chord, so maybe we even say, we just have this very kind of modal shift we have you could say it begins with a modal shift using the Dorian or something from the parallel major. And that shift, that modal shift, launches us into the key of B major right off the get-go, which is unusual. So if we do that, we say, okay, great. Let's go back from our C sharp major. Well, right before, I see that we've got, so we're going to call this 1. G sharp is going to be 5. We have D sharp half diminished 7 over F sharp. Well, that's from a minor key, so that would imply C sharp minor. So I would call that 2 half diminished 6/5. So maybe this is a Picardy third, just like we have here at the very ending, where we're actually in C sharp minor, but it cadences on a major triad. That would have, especially since we have a C sharp minor triad right here, 1/6/4. Normally we expect 1/6/4 to go to straight to 5, but it's 1/6/4 back to 2 half diminished 6/5, 5. We can make sense of that, which means here this would be a 4/6, and then this would just be a 4 chord. Now this does look a little bit like our 1 chord, so we might have to go back and change this. But if you're working as a composer or you're trying to pass an exam, you want to get something down. And then you can go back and kind of check your work. So there's no harm in kind of saying, okay, well, can we get our work down here? Get something down. So here, this would not be in the key of C sharp minor, this E sharp diminished. Nor would this B or this F sharp major triad. So here, things get a little bit trickier. So maybe there's something else going on here. Maybe it continues in the key of B major for a little bit, right? So maybe it continues as a 5/6 going to 1. And then here, this might be cause for something, what's going on here? Is this a secondary function? Are we going to now to C sharp minor? So I'm going to put a question mark here for right now. We're going to come back to that. Moving forward, we see we have a cadence on a E major triad, so let's call that 1. B here, so that's going to be our 5. We have F sharp minor triad, so that would be a 2/6. A major over C sharp, that's going to be a 4/6 chord. So 4/6 to 2/6, that's fine. Going back, this would be a 1 chord. And here, this would be a 5 chord, right? A 5/6. Maybe this A is a 5/6/5 or a passing tone. Either way would be a correct analysis. So then the 4 chord here, we would simply call that, this A major triad here would be a 4 chord. E, this could be 1/6, right? And F sharp minor could be a 2 chord, right? So we could say all of this here is in the key of E major. That wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world. We could say all of this is this is C sharp minor. Maybe it starts off in B major and moves over. Let's keep going with this kind of approach. Let's assume this A major is a 1 chord. Then this would be a 5 chord, or 5/6 chord rather. And this C sharp minor would be, well, that would be a little unusual, right? So C sharp minor, is that right? Did I say that correctly? Yeah, so that would be a 3 chord. It's a little strange, 3 going straight to 5/6. And this F sharp here would be a 6 chord. Well, that's a little strange, so usually those are reversed. So we're going to have to come back and look at this for sure. This would be 5/6 of 6. This would be a 1 chord. So we get a little funniness right here, okay? We got a 5/6/5 right here. Again, if we're assuming A major, this would be 4/6 on, this is on beat 2, and 6 on beat 1, and then we would say in A major, this would be a 3 chord, the C sharp minor. So let me see if I can use the blue here to indicate. So if we say this is all in the key of A major, and I'm not saying 100%, and then this is in the key of F sharp, so F sharp, A, E, and I'm going to say B major goes at least up to here. So this is going to be B. And then it seems like we get to like C sharp minor, but this one's got a little bit of a question mark to it too. So that's kind of how I put up my initial analysis of this piece. And I recognize that there were some strange things, and there might be some better ways to analyze exactly how things are functioning. My colleague definitely thought that this was a direct modulation, and I originally was like trying to use this B major as a pivot chord, saying that it was a mode mixed 4 becoming a 1. She thought it would be more accurate to call it a direct modulation. I think that makes sense. I think that one's maybe one that you can kind of say is direct modulations normally happen at phrases. So just a direct modulation is kind of like when you say, how do they modulate? Well, we don't see a connection. It's kind of what direct modulation is saying. But there is a one, so maybe I argue a little bit with her, right? So F sharp, A, B. F sharp, B in terms of root movement is down a 5th. That's very traditional root movement. It's just the sonority is different. So perhaps I might stick with this idea of using a major 4 as a pivot chord right here to get us to B major. She thinks it's a direct modulation. I think a pivot chord to show that there is this kind of circle of fifths relationship, so that it's not just whoosh, no connection at all. She agreed with me all through this. She thought that right here that we were definitely back in F sharp minor. And let's take a little look at this together, right? So if I say, okay, we're here B major, and then we're going to go to C sharp minor. Well, you know, this E sharp diminished definitely tonicizes this. So does it sound like we're going to C sharp minor and this is a 4 chord, or does this sound like a 1 chord? And that's going to be like who's right. And so I'm going to play that, and again, I apologize for the auto-tune piano, but hopefully it'll give you a close enough idea. So and certainly go listen to this, a recording of this, and you can absolutely judge it a little bit better for yourself. So if we cadence here on the B major triad, this is our fermata. We then launch into an F sharp, F sharp. So it still sounds like we're in B major, and then here, something different, right? That E sharp tells us something different, and then we get to. Does that sound like a 1 chord, or a 4 chord? That's the question. Well, that's something you might need to listen to multiple times. Certainly, you could, you know, a 1 chord possibly, right? Could it be a 1 chord? It does sound very, you know, has a very much similar qualities to the beginning of 1 going to 1-6. There's a little bit more of an expansion, but as soon as we get to this 1-6, I'm sorry, I should call it a C sharp minor 7 over G sharp, we're definitely not in the key of F sharp minor at that point. 1-6-4 is just such an obvious, like this 1-6-4 to 5. This is so clearly a cadence onto a C sharp, like a 2-5-1, like a 1-6-4-5-1 cadence. So this very much sounds like C sharp here. And we could say, well, is that maybe just like a little tonicization of the 5 chord in the key of F sharp minor? You could make that argument. So if you were, what you would say is instead of analyzing it like I did here, you would say 7 diminished 6, 1, 1, 6, and then you would call this cadence here a 5. And so this would be 5 of 5. This would be 2 half diminished 6, 5. You'd put it all over 5. So this is how you do that. And you might even go so far as to go, yeah, I think this is what I would do. I would write what my analysis was, but I would just say all over 5. That's how I might do it. So I might say 1, 6, 4, 2 half diminished 6, 5, 5, all of 5. Right? So instead of, my analysis was calling this a 4 chord and saying we're in C sharp. But you could also say, and I think I agree with her, I think this might be a more illuminating analysis than what I had. That call this 1 because we still have that as our groundwork, and that this is all just kind of like a secondary tonicization, and this is really like a half cadence on 5. And then we go right back. You could say, you know, and then this, you could say, is a 1 chord in F sharp minor or a 2 chord in E major. And you can make that argument. So that's another possibility, and I think I prefer hers in that spot. And if we were to continue going, after we get to this B major triad, now where do we cadence on that B major triad? I'm sorry. I'm keeping track of a bunch of different pieces of paper at once here. So, all right, so here's another spot where there was a little bit of a dispute in terms of what my friend thought it was versus what I thought it was. So she thought that this was actually an A major, this section here. And so that the modulation here wasn't, that this was 1, and that this whole section here was in the key of A major. So let's see what it would look like. And this is kind of how you can, you know, as you're figuring things out, as you're analyzing pieces of music, you might have like, well, here's option 1, here's option 2. Which one of these looks like it's explaining what's going on better? And so it's 100% okay, and actually recommended that you might want to have 2 different versions, then listen to it, play it on the piano, think about what's the traditional expected chord changes, and then decide which one is the most accurate. And even once you've done all that, you still might find that some stuff just, you're a little uncertain. And maybe, just maybe, that ambiguity is intentional by the composer. Maybe there isn't supposed to be a this is what it is answer in certain sections. Perhaps composers like Bach wants us to feel a certain level of uncertainty and lack of clarity so that a measure or a couple beats later they can clarify and you feel like, again, another way of playing with tension and resolution. So this is why I think having these kind of like debates and disagreements is super healthy and very insightful. You kind of say, well, are you wrong? And sometimes the answer is there is a right and wrong, and you can be wrong. And sometimes it's like, well, this section actually is a bit ambiguous as to what it is. So, but let's assume my colleague hunch is right, and that we are in the key of A major, not E major. Okay? And if that were the case, this would be a 5-6 going to 1. Well, that's so far so good. Here we have a B major triad. Well, this would be a 5 of 5, a 5-6 of 5 going to 5. So that's okay. That's fine. This would be 1-6 going to, which is kind of like an expansion of 1. You wouldn't call it a 6-6. It's just an expansion of 1 to the B major, which is again a 5 of 5, going and ending with a cadence on 5. Right? You could say, look, so it's another half cadence, like we had here, like what she was thinking happened here. So that looks plausible. I mean, I think they both look plausible. And so then the question comes, well, if you were to play it, does one sound more accurate to what you're doing? So let's listen to it. We end here with our, so we got to the spot where we had the C sharp major triad cadence. Then we pick up from there. Oh, I did that wrong. Oh, no, I didn't. I did do it wrong. Oh, and actually, I did do something wrong there. That really would be a 7th chord. Okay, so let me fix that. Right, so here this E carries through. I hope someone caught me on that already. So that would really be 2-6-5 in my version, right down here. So F sharp minor 7. Yeah, look at me catching my own mistake there. Okay. So let me rephrase the question, right? So I'm gonna start playing here, and then we're gonna have to ask ourselves, does this sound like a 1 chord or a 4 chord? Does this here sound like a 1 chord or a 5 chord? And that might help answer which one of these seems to be the more accurate explanation. So this is the C sharp major triad. And then this is either going to be a 2 chord in E major or a 1 chord in F sharp minor. So if that's 1, then this becomes 5, right? So is that 1 or 4? Is that 1 or 5? And that's not an easy answer for either one of those. But this is the process, and that's really what I want to make sure I'm sharing with you all, is the kind of process and the kind of deep thinking and type of work that you're going to need to do to really come up with things that make sense and work. The the other types of things is whether this all here, whether it starts off in A major and at a certain point transitions into A major, whether it stays in E major and then gets to A major at some point, but maybe not. So maybe it starts in A major, transitions to E, and maybe this should be more analyzed in the key of E, and it continues. So if this were to be in E, right? So let's say this was in E, this would be 6. This would be 2. This D major would not be in the key at all. So this D would not make sense. Then in E7 would be a 5, 6, 5, a 4. Going to 4. And then we start getting back to F sharp minor. So here, this really seems like it should be a 1 chord. But then we go to something that's obviously not a 1 chord, a 5 chord. And then we get to something here that doesn't really fit in that key. So I'm just going to give you what my friend was saying, is that she thought this was a 1 chord, F sharp minor, and F sharp minor. My problem with that is it goes immediately to what's obviously not a 5 chord, a minor 5 chord to a 7 chord to a 3. That's not common at all, right? So if we said this was F sharp minor, then we'd be going to minor 5, then to 7, 6 to 3. That's completely unusual. And she thought that it might stay in, that it goes to E major here. So here it goes to E major, but stays in E major all the way to just to here, so not that much farther. And then goes to this. Yeah. So that's not a big difference in terms of what we were thinking. So the one thing I'm not sure I understand, and I would love to, we were just corresponding via email, and this is what the question originally was about, was this ending spot. And this is the part I'm struggling with to see from her version, saying, well, if this is an F sharp minor, do we then have like a quick tonicization in the key of, do we do another? Because how do we make sense of this? This is a very unusual set of progressions. If we call it an F sharp minor, this is unusual. If we call it in the key of A major, it's less unusual because there's only one thing that's unusual there. Well, no, there's two things that are unusual. 6 would not normally go to 3, it would be the other way around, and 3 wouldn't normally go to 5, 6. So it's kind of like, this whole thing here is kind of going backwards through the circle of fifths. So F sharp up a fifth to C sharp, up to G sharp, and then we have the half-step resolution that we would expect. So is this a tonicization of A? Even that, it only makes sense right like this much of it. This part is like a big retrogression. And so is it 1, then retrogression into A, then shifting back to F sharp minor? I'm going to play it. I'm going to see if I can come up with a definitive answer. I'm going to put my reputation on the line and see if I can give you a solid answer that someone else might just disagree with, which, and keeps things interesting. So let's see. I'm going to go back to after the cadence on the E major to the C sharp minor triad. I'm going to start here. And I'm going to go. I'm sorry. Made that mistake again. Okay, so. That D major says a lot to me, like that we're doing something very different. So I think that And that sounds somewhat different, shocking. So I could absolutely see that we could call this 5/6, turning into like a 5/6/5, 1. But here we get the D natural, so not the Dorian thing that we were talking about before. And then we go to, which sounds like a big shift. You know, I think I do like the idea of calling this a 1 chord in F sharp minor, like my colleague said. And we're definitely in F sharp minor here. So I think we can call this 5, a minor 5, and kind of know that it's kind of this retrogression. And then we can call this 5/6, 1, all of 3. And I think that's what I would say to analyze this. And just calling this, I think it's 5/6, becoming a 5/6/5, right? In the key of F sharp minor, starting right here. But we have these shifts, right? So this sounds like A major to me. When we have this is D natural. This definitely makes it sound like we're in A major right through there. And then we get a shift to F sharp minor with this very unusual cadence, recognizing that some of this might just not make a lot of sense to be using a Roman numeral analysis for. It might be more, we have circle of fifths progressions, we have stepwise motion, but it doesn't fit our chart because it's implying some of the Renaissance modal characteristics. So that's my very, very long answer. Now, one of the things I learned from 2 weeks ago when I did my last live Q&A is that the little microphone lav mic that I use to try to get somewhat better audio has a battery life that expires at about 2 hours and 28 minutes. So I'm going to make sure we don't go that long because I know like the last couple seconds I lost audio. And some of you were like, what happened to the sound? I'm just so grateful that it wasn't like 30 minutes before I ended because then I would have been like so angry. But thank you for all your patience there. I'm going to start looking at some of your questions and comments. And I appreciate your patience with all that. Difference between 3/4-part species counterpoint versus part writing SATB. So let me answer that for Akash. And again, apologies for mispronouncing any names. So species counterpoint does not really concern itself with the kind of circle of fifths chord progressions that we talk about in terms of good chord progressions, right? So the idea of like 3 chord can go to 6 or perhaps to 4. And then a 4 chord, like let's say, you can go to 3 can go either to 6 or 4. 4 can either go to a 2 chord, or maybe it goes straight to a 5 chord, or sometimes it can jump right back to 1 chord. Like this whole chart that we talk about in traditional classical music in particular, it's species counterpoint's not concerned with that. It's concerned with, is this consonant and have consonants? If this has dissonances, does it move to consonances here? Great. Now, how these consonances relate to each other, they're not very concerned with. They don't really even talk about how this consonant necessarily goes to this consonant. Species counterpoint is quite complicated, and I am definitely not an expert once you get up to like 3 or 4 part species counterpoint. I've briefly studied it. I've studied first and second species, a little bit of third and fourth, and it's definitely has it's a whole other like kind of a whole set of ideas and principles behind it. So it is really different than soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Like, there is overlap. It's not completely unrelated. The idea of SATB writing is that these vertical constructs and how they relate to each other are the most important thing. And you want to have good voice leading, by the way. Species counterpoint is you got to have great voice leading, and who cares how this one relates to the other, as long as we have consonants, dissonance, consonants, as long as that we have that ebb and flow in place, everything else is fair game. So that's the basic idea. We got the F sharp minor triad. The penultimate measure is over C sharp. Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Thank you, keeping me honest. I'm using the word penultimate, extra points for that. Very good. Well, 164. So the lead sheet symbol should say over C sharp. Thank you, I appreciate that. When one instrument plays chords in an ensemble, do you consider each note of the chord as a separate voice, or is one note of the chord more important than the others in terms of voice leading? Great question. So this comes into play for piano players and for guitar players, as well as for people who are arranging for, let's say, an orchestra or a wind ensemble where you have a group of instruments playing the chord. So voice leading still counts. And so this is why when you're a beginning piano player and you're learning your chord voicings, let's say you're in the key of F sharp minor, you're not going, you're not just going and then jumping up to, then, right? You're moving. You're trying to move things by step in your hand. So if you're looking at F sharp minor triad, then you go into the B minor triad, you're not just jumping everything up, you're keeping the F sharp in the pinky, you're moving the other, the A goes to the B, the C sharp goes to the D, and you're kind of keeping your hand in a similar position. The same is true when you're playing guitar voicings. You want to look for how it's going to work. And the idea is that you don't need to worry about what's on the bass because there's a bass part. Either there's a bass player or some instrument that's covering the bass line. So you as a chord voicing need to think about making sure that it sounds smooth and it doesn't sound like it's very jumpy. So let me just read the question again. When one instrument plays chords in an ensemble, so let's say like a wind section of an orchestra, do you consider each note of the chord as a separate voice, or is one note of the chord more important? So yes, you consider each one as a separate voice in terms of making sure that the voice leading goes. It's a separate voice that then comes together. There can be doubling. So that doesn't necessarily mean you have parallel octaves. So you can have doubling. That's something to keep in mind. And your second part of the question, or is one note of the chord more important than the others in terms of voice leading? Well, keep in mind, it's kind of like the answer is like, it's not an or, it's like both. Because yes, certain notes are more important in terms of voice leading. We know that if you have a seventh of a chord, that's really got to resolve down. And if you have a leading tone that's in like the up high or down low, that leading tone needs to resolve up to tonic. So yes, each one is considered as separate voices that come together to create chords. And yes, some of those notes are going to be more important in terms of voice leading. So when you have those tendency tones, those sevenths of a chord or seventh of a key, those tendency tones become more important in terms of what happens next in their resolution, whereas the other notes that the other instruments, they are separate voices, but they can be a little bit more willy-nilly in terms of how they resolve and where they go to flesh out and complete the chord. Okay. Can you explain how to write three-part counterpoint? That is a very large question, and so I'm gonna, this is like the kind of thing, I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie Beautiful Mind about the kind of brilliant mathematician who's writing stuff on the windows at Princeton. But I always just kind of like the idea of leaving this up and having some non-music class come in afterwards and just look at this and be like, it's completely ununderstandable in every way. They just like, I see letters, I see what looks like music, I have no idea what this means. Congratulations to all you who are following along with this. You have developed some very sophisticated knowledge. So I'm going to erase it, but it hurts my heart to kind of erase this masterpiece of work that we have just spent so much time discussing together. But I'm going to give you, to answer the question about how to write three-part, I'm going to give some basic principles, because certainly an in-depth one would be a whole series of videos. So I'm going to read the question again to make sure I understood it, which is a good practice for all of you taking tests as well. Can you explain how to write three-part counterpoint? All right. So if you're dealing with three-part counterpoint, and let's put it all on one staff. Actually, no, let's not do that. Let's put it on two staves. We're going to put two parts up here and one part down here. All right? So you're going to need something that has a bass function. And you're going to have, your top voice is going to be your primary melody function. And your middle voice, which will be in here, will in general fill in harmony. So this is very much what that was done in the Baroque era, where you have a melody here, that complementary melody here, and then something that fills in the harmony, your inner voice. So if we're in C major, and we say, okay, we're going to go C, and let's just kind of make up just a tiny bit of a phrase, okay? So, so let's just do that. Bum, ba, da, dum, dee, dum, dum. Let's just say that's our bass melody, right? And you might start with the bass melody, you might start with the actual melody, but let's say you're kind of like, you have that idea as a bass. Let's say that your inspiration comes in the form of that bass. Then when you're thinking about what's going to go with that, very often you're going to look for a third against the bass. So thirds and sixes are such great intervals. So I'm going to think. So I'm going to ba, da, da. So I'm thinking contrary motion. Looking for thirds and sixes with my outer voices. So I'll go da. So I'm going to go, so let's say E. So that gives me a third for my melody. E, D, C, and the C and G create a fourth as incidentally, which is not too dissonant an interval. I do a repeated note. Dee, da, da, dum. And then we're going up. Dum. And then this looks like, it's probably implying one chord harmony, 5-chord harmony maybe here. And I started to say, okay, well, how does the rest of this going to kind of play out? Da, 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 dum. Do I go down to a 5-chord harmony right there? Maybe have it as a suspension. Yeah, so maybe I just kind of ba, ba, da, da, dum. Eighth note, A, G. Right, so I kind of have this descending da, dee, da, ba, E, D, C, C, B, A, G. I have that. And let's say I then try to fill out, well, what's happening harmonically? I'm looking to fill in the harmony here. I have C, I have E, a G would fill in my C major harmony right fine. We got an F here, and a C, an A would create a nice F major triad there. Here we have what looks like maybe a G, this could be a G, so C, F, G, let's say this is a F, G as well, kind of have something basically like that. So I have, and I'm going to spice this inner voice up later on, but that's the trick to three-part counterpoint, is you kind of want to have it move when the other voices are not moving. So if this is an A, I'm going to have this maybe, so we have the A double, this is going to the F, C, B, so something like that is the basic framework of what I'm looking for. And then, again, the idea of rhythmic motion when other parts are holding. It's kind of like another big concept, right? So I'm trying to write, like, what's the big idea? It's contrary motion, thirds and sixes between especially outside voices, rhythmic motion when other parts are holding. So if I see here this G, and I want to go to an A, there's not a real lot of motion I can do because they're just a step away. But here, where this is, this might be a great spot here, where we have the A, F, A, and I want to move my way down, so I might want to go F, E, let's D, C, right? So let's say I put something like that, even just something that simple. And let me see, this is a bit tricky to read because I'm reading from an angle, but we have something like, and here, I would probably move this. Maybe I would leave that there. That would be kind of interesting. Yeah, and so, again, bear with my less than stellar piano playing, but I think you get the idea there of the concepts that you would utilize in terms of trying to write three-part counterpoint. You're thinking melodically, which is the whole point of counterpoint. You're then thinking about the intervals and their relationships, and then you're trying to think of rhythmically that everything is kind of moving at different times so that it's not everything holding at once, everything moving at once. So you have that variety that gives it the independence of voices. All right. Just before the penultimate triad, it should be a G major triad over B. I think we're talking about our original example. And I'm going to go back. I think there's a G sharp going on in that example. Yeah, if I had not written it, there would have been, it was a G sharp diminished triad over B. And if I mistakenly left the G sharp out, again, it's those differing key signatures might have thrown me off. I should have had a G sharp in the alto in the third to last measure, beat 3. So it should have been bottom to top B, D natural, G sharp, B. Then that all resolves to your F sharp minor triad with C sharp. So hopefully I clarified that. I do apologize if I did make a mistake. So Alex likes from the early one keeping the second phrase in F sharp minor and call it a half cadence. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's what I've come up with. You're welcome, Jack. My pleasure. You see what you started? I got 5 on my AP Music Theory exam from your videos. Thank you. You're very much welcome. Does the soprano, alto, tenor, bass structure also apply to piano pieces? For example, Beethoven sonatas. So the great question there from Thomas. So the answer is partially. So does soprano, alto, tenor, bass apply to a piano sonata? Voice leading does apply, but it can be broken more easily with an instrument like the piano than you would normally do with voices. Keep in mind, for the human voice to do wide leaps is hard. For a piano, it is easy. So if you have something like, and you're having, easy for a pianist. As a singer, doing 2-octave jumps, hard. Doing dissonant intervals with the voice, hard. Whereas with the piano, if you know what notes you're supposed to play, very easy. So wide leaps, dissonant intervals. These are the types of things that in instrumental music, like a Beethoven piano sonata, you will find more of than you do in this soprano, alto, tenor, bass writing. Hey, let me say it again. Wider leaps, more dissonant melodic intervals. That said, those things are just an exception to what you normally find. It's just the exception happens more frequently than you would expect for a chorus or something like that. But voice leading counts. The other thing that's different in, let's say, a Beethoven piano sonata is that there's going to be more doublings. And that expands, especially when you get to people like Franz Liszt. You know, they start doubling things. So you'll have more voices, essentially, being played because more fingers are being depressed. So yes is the basic answer, but with more exceptions than ever before. All right, another question. Is it a voice leading rule to always double the third scale degree in a 7-1 progression in a minor key? Is it considered a deceptive cadence if we are still going to the tonic? So, Jack, you're asking about, you wrote 7-1, and I'm not sure you actually meant uppercase Roman numeral 7, so subtonic. I'm wondering if you meant 7 diminished 6 to 1, and you know, because this is super common. This is not. And in a diminished triad, whether it's a 2 diminished 6 or a 7 diminished 6, you almost always double the third. That's the general rule. Diminished triads, because let's say we have F sharp, A, C, because this diminished fifth is so dissonant, you don't want to accentuate it by doubling one of the notes that's in that super dissonant interval. You don't want to double the F sharp, you don't want to double the C. You double the A, because that's the one that softens it, because the A plus C is a third, A plus F sharp is a third. So if you have two A's, that kind of like takes away from the harshness of the diminished interval. So that's the basic answer for that. So I hope I answered your question. Do you always double the scale degree, the third scale degree? Actually, let me reread your question. So third scale degree, and let's say we go in C minor. Third scale degree is in E flat. A 7-1. Oh, okay. You probably are actually talking about 7-1. You're probably talking about the third scale degree in the 1 chord. So scale degrees. So here we would have B flat, D, F, going to C, E flat, G. Because this is up by step, you're going to have to move. The bass will go up by step. Everything else will go down by contrary motion. So you don't have parallel fifths or parallel octaves. So let me do a quick part writing of how you would to do that. Assuming that we are talking about C minor, and we're talking about a subtonic 7 chord. So let's put a B flat here, going to a 1 chord, which is an unusual progression, but let's do it right anyways. Our key signature would be I'm sorry, not 4 flats, 3 flats. So 3 flats. Let's say we put another B flat here. I'm going to put in F, D. Everything, because this is up by step, whenever you have a chord progression that moves up by step, everything else has to go down in contrary motion. So with that, I don't think you would necessarily be doubling scale degree 3, which is the E flat in the key. So scale degree 3. I don't I mean, I guess you could. Actually, you don't have to, but you could do that, right? You could have the sopranos move up, and you could have that, so you have these parallel thirds in the outer voices. So let's hear what those two different options would sound like. So we got. That's without doubling the third. Both of those are acceptable voice leading. Both of them would be acceptable. Now, whether they could be considered a deceptive resolution, kind of, in the sense that if we think about what we normally call a deceptive resolution, which would be 5 to 6, it's up by step. And we normally double the third in this pattern. So if we're kind of really thinking of it as kind of like deceptive in a slightly different key, not really 7 to 1, but 5 to 6 in a different key, then you would want to double that third like this, and it would be a deceptive resolution. If you're really thinking about a 7 to 1, subtonic 7 to 1 as being a somewhat unusual progression, then certainly you could just double the root as you would normally in a root position triad. So I think I understand the question, and it's a good one. 7 to 1 is kind of like going 5, and it would be 5 to 6, because then it would be you would want to, not in a minor key, right? It's kind of like in a major key going 5 to 6, and you would double the third of the chord in the 6th chord, which is the same thing as saying double scale degree 3, which is the same thing as saying the third of the chord when we're dealing with a 1 chord. So third of the key, scale degree, third of the chord. In this case, it's the exact same thing. So yes, this has that similar deceptive quality, and to reinforce that deceptive quality, I would like to amend my answer and say, yeah, you would double the third. But even with deceptive resolutions, you can sometimes, you should double the third, but sometimes you'll see an exception made, and they'll just have the good voice leading, and they'll do a regular doubling. But your rule of thumb should be to double the third. So for your question, I would say the same thing. Yeah, I would consider it a deceptive resolution. I would double the scale degree 3, but I might not label it as subtonic 7 to 1. I might label it as the way it's functioning, because if it's functioning like a deceptive resolution, I might want to make it look like that. Depends on the larger context of the piece, but I would at least consider that. All right. This is from Wayne. As a guitar player, after spending years being frustrated with the limitations of pentatonics when soloing, I recently started to understand modal theory. Can you help me with how to ear train? Wayne, great question. I see you have a follow-up as to hear the different tonalities of each mode and the different intervals. Yeah, okay, and Thomas agrees with that. Would love to learn more about how to spot that certain pieces in a particular mode. You know, I think, and then we have one last question. High is more important in 4-part writing to make the soprano melodic by leaping or to move as little as possible. So I'm gonna answer Wayne and Thomas's. Is going to be the final thing I talk about. So Erzi, yes, soprano is the one that you want to make the most interesting. So let me rephrase. As a music theory teacher who might grade you, I say make your music as boring as possible. Don't try to be creative. Don't try to make things interesting. Learn all the rules and just have it perfect in terms of rules. In which case, don't do lots of leaps in any part, soprano or otherwise, because it makes your life harder. So I say be boring, learn the rules, have them under your foundation. And then when you're actually composing, then pull out your creativity and have those rules as your foundation to make sure that it all actually works when you're done feeling the inspiration and being creative and trying to make it interesting. As a composer, the answer to your question is absolutely. In four-part writing, you want to make the soprano melodic by having some leaps. You don't need a lot, right? It can be predominantly stepwise, a few thirds. Thirds sometimes sound like leaps, sometimes sound like steps, the interval of a third. But really, when you have a leap of a fourth, a fifth, or a sixth, that's where things get really exciting. And you want to have those maybe one every 5 to 8 notes. You might want to have a leap that's of that larger quality, as opposed to having everything just kind of go very, very narrow. So that would be my advice for keeping your soprano interesting, and also making sure you differentiate between whether you're just trying to pass a test and make sure you learn the rules. So you'd be like, you put making the soprano interesting on hold so you can make sure you focus on learning the rules, because you can only think about so many things at once. So you do that sometimes. You limit your options to focus on a certain thing that you want to master. And that's totally acceptable. So let's, as our last question, and our remaining time, because I don't want to have the mic run out of battery juice and we lose audio, let's talk about differentiating by ear the different modes and what to listen for to kind of tell which one is which. I talk a little bit about this in some of my earlier videos where I talk about the modes and I lay out the differences and I kind of compare and contrast. So that'll certainly be helpful for you to take a look at. But I did not put an emphasis on doing the ear training side of it. So I'm going to kind of put some of that stuff up again, but then I'm going to go and I'm going to talk about like how you go about trying to get your ear developed to tell the differences between the different modes. So this is Ionian mode. And I'm going to write out all the major modes, okay? And I'm going to write them all starting on C so that you can kind of see where they depart and how they depart. So I'm writing out now the Lydian mode. You can see, compared to the Ionian mode, it's this fourth note that's different, right? So this one the Lydian mode has an augmented fourth, and the Ionian mode has a perfect fourth. Big difference, right? Now I'm going to write out the Mixolydian mode. You'll notice that it has the perfect fourth, just like the Ionian. But here, you have the difference. And I wonder if there's an even better way I could write this out in terms of the order for ear training. I kind of think I might want to go switch these two. I'm going to show you, and I'll see if you can figure out why I'm doing that. So we start with Lydian, we go to Ionian, then we go to Mixolydian. And what I like is that it's just this, you can hear what changes, and you just got one change. The augmented fourth becomes a perfect fourth, the major 7 becomes a minor 7. All right? And if we look at what the parent key is, so this is coming from a G major scale, C major scale, F major scale. We're going down in fifths now. So as opposed to the order I first put up, where we don't get to have that pattern. So that's what you're getting. And the other intervals that all stay the same in these cases, for these modes, is that they all have a major second, they all have a major third, they all have a perfect fifth, and they all have a major sixth. So that's going to be the same for all 3 of the major modes. Okay, so these are your 3 major modes. And so your other modes are going to be your Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and it's debatable whether Locrian is really considered a mode. It was not considered a mode early on. We're talking about in the Middle Ages. It wasn't until later on. That's because it's the only mode that does not have a perfect fifth in it. So it's a little bit less. So in general, the idea was that there's 3 major modes, there's 3 minor modes, and then there's Locrian, which is like neither one. Okay? So I'm trying to think what would be the best way. What's the order I would write the minor modes, the 3 minor modes? I think I'm going to write it. So if I go, let me just, this is tentative, so I might change this. If I write it as C Dorian, and then, so that's parent key is B flat, and then I write C Aeolian next. And then I write C, so that parent is going to be E flat. So again, can go down, then this will be A flat, right? Then C, D flat, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat. Yeah, so that's the right order. All right, so let's take a look here. What do we have that changes? We got that A becomes A flat, D becomes D flat. That's where we have the changes again. So in Dorian, we have a major 6 that becomes a minor 6. And then we have a major second that becomes a minor second. Other than that, everything stays the same, right? So we always have a minor third. We always have a perfect fourth. We always have a perfect fifth. And we always have a minor 7. So when you're trying to do ear training, you want to look at what changes and what stays the same. And that guides your ear to focus in on it. So, and again, Locrian we're not going to talk about. It's not a major mode, it's not a minor mode. We're going to just talk about the 3 major and the 3 minor modes. So, let's start with our major modes. We know that they all have major second, major third. I'm going to skip the fourth. 5, 6. So you're talking about pentatonics. That's your pentatonic, right? And the beautiful thing about a pentatonic is it doesn't matter whether like the rest of the band is playing Lydian, Ionian, or Mixolydian. You just play your pentatonic and it's correct for all 3 of them. But if you want to start getting a little bit more sophisticated, you might want to say, okay, I'm going to start paying attention to the notes that are different. So there's your Lydian sound. So do, re, mi, fi, re. It's not fa, fi. Versus that's your perfect fourth. That's your augmented fourth, and you can hear that difference. There's certain songs that use that a lot. So there's like a certain musical theater composers that love Lydian. And if you think about the theme song for The Simpsons, or Maria, I once met a girl named, from West Side Story. You can kind of find music that uses Lydian modes, and you can do a Google search, songs in the Lydian mode that help you kind of key in on that. The other thing is the major 7. That major 7, the way to hear it is as coming from, if you take your root, it's just a half step, da, like do, ti, do, do, ti, do, do, ti, do, do, ti, do. Where your half steps lie is another good thing to focus in on when figuring out different modes. So your half step is here, and it's from here, B to the C, or put the B down here, right? That's where your half step is. Whereas versus the Ionian mode, your half steps shifts here, and with Mixolydian, it shifts to between scale degrees. So here it's between scale degree 4 and 5, 7, 8. 3 and 4, 7, 8. 3 and 4, 6 and 7. So that's your Lydian sound. Half step resolution right there. Half step resolution at the end. So if I play. And you got a da 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 da. To make it easy, like if you know you have a major third and you have the augmented fourth, that's the only one it can be. So once you get that augmented fourth information, it's the only mode that has that, which makes Lydian so unique. Ionian is your major scale. So hopefully, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. By singing, do, a deer, a female deer, re, a drop of gold. You kind of, that starts cementing that into your ear. And then Mixolydian sounds like a major scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. But it's a half step lower. You get to a te or a flat 7, however you want to call it. And here you have this, right? So instead of when I have, if this is my 1 chord, I go down and it comes B, let's say B flat D F, a B flat major triad, that whole step below the bass. So that sound versus, so 1 leading tone, this would be like our Ionian, versus our Mixolydian. The blues, so jazz, the blues, heavy emphasis on Mixolydian scales. And you, again, focus in on the right here, the bottom part of it. This da, da, this whole step versus da, da, where you have that half step. So that's a really good way to focus in on the root, the tonic, the scale degree 1, and how that relates to, is it da, 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 or da, da, da. Playing with the piano and singing will help you so much developing your ears, or any kind of keyboard. Teoria.com has some good ear training. Hearing those whole steps and half steps. Let's say Teoria. Let me just write that down for those of you who don't know about that website. It's a great way to get your ears trained. And then finally, let's take a quick look at our minor modes. Right? In this case, we know they all have a minor third, 4, perfect fourth, 5, minor 7. Look again, a pentatonic, right? Major pentatonics versus minor pentatonics. And the notes that change are the notes that turn us from pentatonics, playing with pentatonics, to playing with actual full scales, right? So if we go for our, and I did not write this down for clarity, but I'm going to write it so you all know. This is our Dorian, this is our Aeolian, and this is our Phrygian. Okay, so let's listen to Dorian. Half step happens right here. Versus Aeolian. Aeolian is the one that's probably going to sound a little bit more traditional to you, because that's also called our natural minor. So this kind of ba da da da, that descending minor bass line, it's so Aeolian. Da 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 ba da da da. That's an Aeolian sound. Check it out if it was Dorian and see how weird it is. Not weird in a good way, right? It would be it's kind of neat to have it, but it's a different feeling, right? The versus, listen to it again as in context. The A natural is less common. And Phrygian is very often associated with like flamenco dancing or Spanish, because that minor second right? It's the only one that has a minor second of all these, both these majors and these minor modes. So what I would recommend you do is sit at the piano, play a bass note. Let's just take this to C, because you got all the notes here. Just play that bass note over and over, and just start playing the scale, and then start trying to improvise and come up with stuff. So if I was going to say, so Caleb was saying Dorian and Lydian mode are your favorites. So let's say Dorian. Let's go with Dorian. I'm going to play a C, 2 C's in octaves down low. And then I'm going to start improvising. I might start with just playing the scale, but I'm always playing that bass note to help reinforce, because it's the intervals above the bass that give it its character. Then I might start playing in thirds. And then I might start playing triads, because those are just 2 notes. That was just, but now. I'm just doing root position triads. Then I might start putting triads in inversion with my right hand. So C, E flat G, C, F, A. So putting inversions with my right hand. And I start doing that, and I start then singing the scale with it. So I'm combining a visual aspect of the piano, I'm hearing it with my ears, so I get the auditory, and then I sing it so that I'm also getting my voice, a connection between my voice and the sounds. And if you do that, you'll really start to pick up on the different qualities. So I'm going to do, since we're live here, I'm going to let you guys, we're going to play a game. I'm going to improvise for like 30 seconds in one of the 6 modes. It's either going to be Lydian, Ionian, Mixolydian, Dorian, Aeolian, or Phrygian. I'm going to improvise for 30 seconds, and I want you to type in what mode you think it is. All right? So let's see how you do. Here we go. I'm going to see if I can randomly pick one in my head. Okay, I got the mode I want. All of these will be based on C. That's my improv. What do you guys think? What do you think? I just used the notes in one of these modes. I was just playing like bass note. I was playing some triads. So we got someone saying definitely major. We got someone saying Mixolydian question mark. You are correct. It is a major mode. And we've got 2 people now for Mixolydian. You guys are on the money. That was Mixolydian mode. Let's do another one. Let's do another one. Let's do another one. See if you can do it again. Okay, here's another mode. We're all still based on C. All based on C. Here we go. Here we go. I'm going to make this, instead of using triads in my right hand, I'm going to use fourths. So I ended with a triad, but I was primarily using stacked fourths, kind of like what Debussy would do, or McCoy-Tyner with John Coltrane. Okay. Okay, we've got someone saying Ionian. We got 4 Phrygians in a row. I got news for you. You're all wrong. Well, let me explain it to you. Here's what I played. So here's the bass note. Da. And if I go up a step, da, 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 da. That's 1 major second, minor third, perfect fourth, fifth. So I'm hearing. So the half step you're picking up on, and the reason you probably said Phrygian and mistakenly, is this is the 5th going up to the minor 6. What you're picking up on is this G, A flat. You're not picking up on C, D flat. It's the G, A flat you're hearing. Listen to it again. C, D, E, D, G, C, G, F, I'm sorry, G, C, F, A flat, D, G. So there, it's not perfect fifths. You get an augmented interval. Minor third, minor 6, major second. So that was an Aeolian mode. So I made that extra hard for you. I apologize. I was putting things in fourth. That makes it a little bit harder. Okay, I'll give you one last one. We're almost coming up on 2 hours, and like I said, I want to keep my battery safe so that you're all hearing it. But it looks like you're hearing it. I'm going to give you one more. Okay, we've done Aeolian. We've done Mixolydian. I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm going to pick one of these here. I'm not going to use fourths, but I am going to try to trick you. I'm not sure how yet, but I'm going to try to trick you. Okay, I think I know what I'm going to do. Here we go. Again, based in C. The way I'm going to trick you is I'm not going to play the bass note right away. I'm going to lead into it more slowly. All right, what do we got here? Ooh, we got people, all sorts of guesses. This is a lot of fun, guys. This is how you know this is a good exercise, right? It's a good exercise when we're at least as a group here. It was just one mode for the whole thing. The answer was Phrygian. Phrygian. So I started off by playing an F and an E flat. I was kind of thinking like chopsticks, right? So I got E flat, F, and then I expand to D flat and G, then C and A flat, and then 2 B flats. So, and then I play C and G down low. So let me just write it out so you see it, and I'll play it again. I went E flat, F, I then expanded it to D flat, G, then C, A flat, then 2 B flats, and then down low, I put C, G as a perfect fifth. So that gives you all the notes that you would have in the Phrygian you know, in the scale. I give it up to y'all. E flat F, D flat G, C A flat, B flat. And that's very much that Spanish where you have G, C, E flat. That's a C minor triad, second inversion, going to a D flat major triad, A flat, D flat, F. Great. Well, you know, that was actually a lot of fun, and it makes me think that perhaps it might be good for us to spend a little bit of time at the end of our live Q&As doing a little bit of ear training exercises, because music theory is super important. Connecting it with your ear is the ultimate. The ear and the theory. There's so many great musicians in the world who play awesome by ear. And there's so many people who like know their theory in and out. And the real elite are the people who can do both. So with that in mind, I want to thank you for joining me. I'm looking again to do these every 2 weeks, so not next weekend, but the weekend afterwards. I'm looking to do another one. Danny, who set up my Facebook page for you to all kind of talk to each other about these questions and things like that, set up a Facebook page. I'll put links to that. Danny, you want to ask me last time about negative harmony. I have not forgotten about you, nor your question, but this Bach example that was thrown at me, it got me so curious, and it had me asking friends about what they thought it was, and I just really was excited to talk about that with you all today. So I'm still keeping track of stuff. Thank you for joining me. I will see you in 2 weeks, hopefully. Be well.